right, welcome to another episode of Vinny Presents. I'm here today with a person who is from, well, I guess you could say comedic royalty, but he is a photographer, musician, writer. You may know him from Hollywood and Swine and many other adventures. Today we have Andy Marx. Andy, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here. You can also say I'm from musical royalty too.
You know what? You are. That's right. Well, I'll let you present yourself. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, that brings me to the subject of my novel that I wrote and which is available in all fine bookstores called Royalties. It's a play on the word royalty. But we can get to that later. What would you like to hear? My background, or what would you?
Yeah, let's tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your bio. Let's tell them everything.
Well, let's see. Like I say, I'm old, so I've gone through many decades of different careers. I grew up in L.A. Grandson of Groucho Marx, and on my mother's side, grandson of one of the greatest songwriters who ever lived. His name was Gus Kahn. And if you don't know his name, you probably have heard of some of his songs, which include It Had to Be You, Dream a Little Dream of Me, Making Whoopee, and I'll See You in My Dreams, which also happens to be the name of the biopic about him that stars Danny Thomas and Doris Day. So I grew up in LA, was a surfer, loved the water, played music, wanted to do a little writing, as every high school kid does. Went off to college, came back, graduated from UCLA, started writing, became a writer. Then from there, I moved into the exciting world of film publicity, where I went to work at Warner Brothers in the film publicity department in the 80s. And eventually I left there. And I actually worked on some good movies there, including the Academy Award winning Chariots of Fire, which I was very proud that actually won Best Picture that year. From there, I went on to become what is known as a unit publicist, which is the guy that does the publicity while a movie is in production. I always say it's the most hated man on the set because basically nobody likes the unit publicist. He's basically in everybody's way, and they would prefer he's not there. But I liked it. I worked on a couple of I worked on actually some really cool movies. I worked on the first Terminator. I worked on Above the Law. I worked on Michael Mann's movie called Manhunter, and some various other ones. So that was kind of cool. You never know what you're going to end up with when you go take a job on a movie on location. It's different for everyone. And then I eventually I got married, and I kind of didn't like the traveling around so much. So I kind of fell into accidentally journalism, which I really loved. And I did that for a number of years. Was a freelancer at a lot of places. Then I worked at the LA Times, worked at Daily Variety and Weekly Variety, and that was in the 90s. And then I went on, that was kind of the beginning of the internet and all of that. And I was very much into that. And actually at Variety, I kind of was the kind of first reporter to sort of cover technology in Hollywood and all that. Did that for a few years. Then I moved on to some of the actual publications that were covering that field. And I went to work at a place called Interactive Week. I was the LA bureau chief. Did that kind of till the internet crash. And then I don't know, actually, at some point, I turned back into screenwriting. And I happened to it's either lucky or unlucky. I was one of those writers who could always sell a pitch and get hired to write the movie, but then basically the movies never get made. But that's pretty much how it is. In Hollywood, most stuff does not get made, and being paid to write stuff that doesn't get made is better than doing it on spec and not getting paid. So, I can't complain. And then, so that kind of went on. In the meantime, I started writing my novel, Royalties, which is a fictionalized version of the lives of Groucho Marx, Gus Kahn, and the woman who married Gus Kahn, whose name was Grace LeBoy. But it's sort of a love triangle, one of those epic historical romance books. And it's available, as I say, where all fine books are sold, including Amazon. And so I did that, and then we launched. Oh, and then around I'm sure this is more info than you probably wanted. I then during not this last writer's strike, last year, but in 2007 there was another one which was pretty bad. And I don't know, somehow I had been doing photography, but I kind of fell into uh, doing it professionally, and I started to get a lot of jobs. So I was working as a screenwriter, but I was doing a lot of photography, going on location. I still have a dealer, an art dealer in Florida who sells my work. Then we launched Hollywood and Swine, and that's kind of been it, you know. And then my latest thing is I do a one man Gus Kahn show where I perform and tell stories about Gus Kahn, and I talk about his music and his songs. And I'm actually doing it at this year's Turner Classic Movies Film Festival. So if anybody's in LA on that weekend of April, I'm going to be performing Sunday, April 21st at Club Hollywood, which is in the, or not Club, TCM, Club TCM at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. I will be doing that show. And then Frank Ferranti are doing, and actually I'm going to bring him up on stage for a couple of numbers, a couple of Groucho numbers. And then we're also appearing at this year's Marx Fest, and that will be, I believe that's May 24th at Coney Island, where Frank and I are appearing. I'm doing my show, which is called It Had to Be Gus, and Frank's going to do a little bit of his thing, and we're going to do a little stuff together. And that's my entire sad life. So I hope I didn't bore you too much with that.
Well, on the contrary, it's very fascinating and just shows all the different creative hats that you've worn over the years.
That's so it's weird. I've always had a weird. I mean, I guess because of the two families, but I've always had this thing where, for a while I work as a writer, and then I go, and I want to do music now, and so I did that. When I got out of college, I very much I really wanted to be a songwriter, and this was back in the '70s when the singer songwriter thing and Jackson Brown and all those people, and there really was this whole cool thing in LA where all the songwriters knew each other, and you could basically you could call like any publishing company in LA, and a guy would pick up the phone, like the guy who was in charge, and you'd say, "Hey, I've written 3 songs. May I bring them in and play them for you?" And he'd go, "Sure." And you'd go in like the next day, and he'd sit there, and you'd have a cassette, or you'd play it on piano, and it was just the greatest thing, and everybody knew each other, and it was very cool. So I really kind of wanted to do that. I got a few recordings, but then at the same time I was sort of doing stuff with writing, and it's probably the two families, I guess. On one shoulder they're going write songs, on the other they're going write a screenplay. So I don't know.
Well, you must have had a hell of a time there. I'm sure you spent a lot of time on up and down Laurel Canyon back in the old
Oh
back
yeah,
in those
well,
days.
actually not as much as I would have liked to, having seen some of those documentaries. But I remember actually doing. I was actually still in college, and somehow I got one of those. I got on one of those open mic things at the Troubadour. Like that was the thing where like Jackson Brown, and it was like a Monday night thing, and everybody played there, and they everybody would watch each other, and then there was a bar, and everybody would hang out in the bar at the Troubadour, and it was kind of a cool little community. It was nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was me. I mean, I spent a little time in LA back in 2000. Well, right after the strike in 2008, I spent a nice summer there, probably a little bit more than maybe at 7 or 8 months, and I was fascinated by just the remnants of some of the history. I mean, there's something magical about Hollywood. I'm sure you've been there long enough to kind of it's worn off by now, but there's always something that's magical about that town.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems a little more magical back then, but but again, there was more sort of this community thing, whereas now it's everybody's goes to a thing and then just posts about it on Instagram or something. There's this community thing is sort of non-existent now, I think.
Yeah, things have changed big time. I agree. I hear it from musicians that are friends of mine here in Philly. And Philly's, of course, you know a lot. I'm sure you know a
Right.
lot about Philly and the music scene here. We had oh geez, I forget the name of it, but it was a big recording studio.
Well, you had the Sound of Philadelphia Orchestra, which
Oh
was
yeah,
which was fabulous, and you actually had there was a guy who was in charge of that. A guy, he was kind of an idol of mine. His name was Tom Bell, and he was the guy that did all of the, who kind of, that was all his stuff. And like when you'd hear those records, any of those, the Spinners or the OJs or all of those people, they all recorded, they were kind of all in that thing. And even Elton John, when he did Philadelphia Freedom, he did that under sort of the auspices of Tom Bell, who, arranged that record and I guess produced it and everything, because he did it with the Sound of Philadelphia Orchestra, which was great. I actually, when I was in my 20s, I lived in a place called Brentwood, California, which is, a suburb of LA. And I always thought this was cool. My mailman was the brother of Tom Bell from the Sound of Philadelphia. So, I thought, well, that's cool. And he said, "Yeah, have you ever heard of my brother?" I go, "Yeah, actually, he's kind of an idol of mine." And Philadelphia's, I was just there, right?
Well,
For
that's what I was going to just bring up now. I wanted to get into that part of it, which was, of course, now your grandfather was Groucho Marx, which is, to me, it's unbelievable. It's a beautiful thing. I
it is,
grew up watching a lot of that stuff, obviously reruns, but I always enjoyed that type of, that was just a different type of comedy. I mean,
yeah,
they had their roots in vaudeville, obviously, and that type of environment. So a lot of that stuff was, you had to be quick on your feet. Improvisation was key. But I mean, your family did a really great job. Really enjoyed the Marx Brothers.
yeah, and that, well, I loved coming to Philadelphia. I got to tell you, So what do you prefer for the cheesesteak? Um, Pat's, or what's the other one?
But right, there's Pat Regino's, and I will never ever hurt anybody's feelings. So we'll have to talk about that off camera. But there's
May I tell you? Let me tell you two funny Philly stories. Well, first of all, when I was there, well, I was there with my wife and with my daughter Gracie, who works. She lives and works in New York, but she came, for the Frank thing, and she and I were brought up on stage and everything. So she and one of her gal pals, they took the train, and so we had fun in New York there. So somebody recommended a place that was absolutely incredible, because we were going to go, to one of those, and we decided not to. So somebody recommended a place called Cleavers. Do you know Cleavers?
I've
And
heard of it.
yeah, it was fabulous. It was unbelievable. It was really good. And I'll tell you a quick, Pat, it's Pat's and Gino's, right? Are the two?
Correct. Correct.
So when I was about the time I got out of college, I had a girlfriend that lived in LA, but she grew up in Trenton, New Jersey. And she had a girlfriend, and her parents, like when she was in high school, they moved to Atlanta, Georgia. So she didn't obviously live in Trenton anymore, but she had her best girlfriend was also from Trenton. And excuse me, her parents still lived in Trenton. And I think my girlfriend's friend also lived in LA, but the parents still lived in Trenton. So for Thanksgiving, which was probably, I don't know, maybe 1975, somewhere around there, we went to New York, and then we traveled to Trenton for Thanksgiving, to the friend's parents' house. And they have, a beautiful Thanksgiving, and so much food, and you're completely full. And then when we got done with the Thanksgiving dinner, we drove to Philly and went to one of the two steak sandwich, the cheesesteak places on top of the Thanksgiving dinner. And it was, but I don't remember which one it was. And as you said, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but it was one of those two. So I now have that, and I now have Cleavers, and you should try Cleavers. It's very good.
Yeah, no, I've heard of it. Someone else told me about them. As a matter of fact, there's
They
all
have
these little hidden gems.
they have the thing, which I'm not really a beer drinker, but I can occasionally have a beer. I mean, occasionally I will. They had a thing that was cool, which was the sort of the automated, like it's a beer thing, but it's on the wall. It's like a self-service beer thing, I guess. And and I've never seen this before. There must have been 25, different spigots for beer, and you just went and kind of got it yourself. It was really cool. It was, so
They have
anyway,
something similar with wine. I think it was there's a place. I think it's called Panorama. I don't know if they still do. But it was basically like wine on tap, which is
yeah.
to me sounds incredible. But
Right. Well, this beer thing looked great. I mean, it just looked great. And I don't know if it's like a computerized thing and they knows how much you take or something, but it was very cool. And the place was great. It was really good.
the reason why, of course, let's let our viewers know why you were in town was because, of course, Frank Ferrante was playing your grandfather
He
in
was.
at the Walnut Street Theater, which consequently your grandfather was at over 100 years ago. Is that correct?
Exactly 100 years ago. 1924, he was there, so they did it there. I had not seen that version of the show. That show was written by my father, and I had not seen that in, I don't know, probably 25 years. And it was incredible, and it was really cool, like to take my daughter who's 24 and is really cool and hip and everything. But my kids, they know a limited amount about the Marx Brothers, so anytime I can go and take them to something like this, or they can go and learn a little bit something. It's really cool. And for her, it was a thrill because they brought her up on stage, and she goes, "Oh, Dad, I can't do this. I'm so." And then, of course, as soon as she did it and heard the applause, she said, "Hey, I got to figure out maybe I can do this again." So she's kind of into it. So I think she's going to come actually when we're doing Marx Fest. I think she and my other daughter, my older daughter, I think they're both going to come. So this may be the debut of the Marx sisters.
It's in their genes. You never know. And there's also, you mentioned your other grandfather there, Khan.
Yeah.
There's probably no relation, but there's a park in Philadelphia, maybe several blocks from where you were on Walnut Street, called the Lewis Kahn Park. Who knows if it's a relation or not? But
Kahn, that name sounds very familiar. No, is it spelled the same?
yes,
Kahn? I don't know who
yes,
Louis Kahn is, but that name, it's like I feel like I've heard that name. He was probably, a bigwig in Philadelphia or
yeah,
something.
yeah. He was. He was. Yeah.
Obviously, he was, and I don't think he's any relation.
I'm sure it's rather it might be somewhat common. And now so let's bring it back. I don't want to spend. I mean, I don't want to take away from your accomplishments, but of course, people are always.
I have no accomplishments of really.
Well, I mean, so how was? I mean, can you tell us about your grandfather? How was it? You remember him as a child?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think I was 26 or 27 when he died. So I grew up, uh, no, I had a good, many years with him as a young child and as a teenager. And then in my later years, I actually worked up at his house because I was doing the kind of the restoration and everything for the You Bet Your Life, reruns. So I spent a couple of years up at the house every day, archiving the films, and and every day we'd have lunch together, and then we would watch. Groucho and I would watch movies, and the thing that's kind of interesting about my upbringing is that in the 50s, other than the fact that he was doing the TV show, which was a success, celebrity back then is not like it is now, right? Where if you're sort of I mean, first of all, there are many people now that are celebrities and they don't really have any talent, but they just they just they're like celebrities because they're celebrities, sort of. And back in the day, that didn't really exist. Like you had to have a certain amount of talent, but it wasn't like crazy. Like it wasn't like Groucho would walk down the street and he would be mobbed by like thousands, and everybody wanted, if like I tell the story that in the 70s, I was at the Greek Theater, I think, seeing probably another one of these Philadelphia groups, either seeing the Spinners or the OJs or one of these groups at the Greek Theater in LA. And it was intermission. And I went to get something to drink, and literally standing alone, like leaning up against a pole, having a drink with somebody else, was Elton John. He's just standing there, and like nobody. Can you imagine now if Elton John was like at a place, what it would be like if he there would be there'd be 1,000 people mobbing him. But back in the day, like that didn't go on. So my point is, when I was growing up, Groucho was not the mega celebrity that people are today. So I just sort of knew him as a regular kind of guy. He was like my grandfather. He didn't he didn't sort of achieve that cult status until well into the 70s, maybe like when he got his Academy Award in 74. But so up to that, and then like when I went off to college in 69, the Marx Brothers thing was kind of just taking off then, with and everybody, and it kind of fit with all the stuff going on the college campuses, and, with the anarchy and everything, and it all, and the people loved the Marx Brothers. So it kind of worked, well in that. And the same with Gus Kahn. When I was growing up, by the time the 50s, by the time we got into the 60s, the whole sort of Tin Pan Alley songwriter thing was sort of kind of getting replaced by all the rock music and everything that was starting to happen in the 60s. You had a few like Carole King and a few of these sort of brill building songwriters that were still, but for these kind of old, especially these older songwriters, they weren't getting the, it wasn't like, they could get a bunch of cuts on records and stuff. It just kind of wasn't happening. And so, I'd hear the occasional Gus Kahn record or something, but it wasn't until I think when it was really CDs that really kind of helped the whole music industry with their catalogs and everything, because all of a sudden, every record that ever existed almost started appearing on CD, and I'd go, oh, here's a Frank Sinatra record, it's got a Gus Kahn on it, and then I'd find another one. Hey, and all of a sudden there's like, thousands of CDs that have Gus Kahn songs, and I go, wow, he's and now of course with Spotify and everything, it's just, but again, so it took a little while for me to sort of realize the heavy weight that both of these men have.